Welcome to part 5 of our workshop series on COVID-19 data analytics with Kubernetes. My name is Haghighi and I'm a developer advocate at IBM. If this is your first time joining us, this is a multi-part workshop series on building, deploying and managing microservices applications with Kubernetes and OpenShift. These workshops are designed around an application that combines multiple containerized microservices for parsing COVID-19 time series data for the number of positive cases and mortality rates in different countries and regions. In this lab, we'll explore one of the most exciting features of OpenShift for developers. We'll explore how CodeReady Workspaces helps teams build with speed, agility, security, and most notably, code in production from anywhere. And by anywhere, it truly means anywhere, as you will find out shortly. Firstly, we're going to take a look at the key features of CodeReady Workspaces and show you how to install CodeReady Workspaces in your OpenShift cluster. We will also discuss operators and the operator hub. Then we'll dive into our workspace to create a sample application from an in-browser IDE and share the workspace with your team members. Here's a quick revision of what we've learned together so far and how that fits into our learning journey throughout this course. We containerize our application with Docker, deployed and managed with Kubernetes, and later we repeated the same steps with OpenShift CLI and console. And now we are going to make it even easier to get started with coding from a browser. If you haven't watched the previous workshops, I highly encourage you to go ahead and review them. You get a clear idea about microservices, containerization, orchestration, how OpenShift automates tedious tasks, and ultimately why CodeReady Workspaces is such a fabulous solution for developers. Developers often spend too much time configuring their development environment, adding their libraries, dependencies, and so forth. It becomes even a bigger problem when developers are collaborating on a big project. Let's say you develop an application on your machine and it runs perfectly, but when others try to run it, all sorts of errors start showing up. And if you are working in a team, despite having kept your team well aware of all the dependencies and libraries, collaborating on a project can become a nightmare. You know that old saying, it works on my machine. CodeReady Workspaces offers a shared development environment for rapid cloud application development using Kubernetes and containers to provide a consistent and pre-configured development environment to your teams. And if you pay attention to the consistency and pre-configuration, that already basically explains everything. It is a cloud-native application environment that allows you to share an instance of your workspace, including all the libraries, dependencies, and tools. All you need to do is add your libraries and dependencies, create a workspace instance, and share that with your team members. It is as easy as sharing a URL called factory with the rest of your team. Clicking at the URL will spin up a new workspace, and this way your team will share the same runtime and same development environment. But that's not all. CodeReady Workspaces include a very powerful in-browser IDE with all the features of modern IDEs, including version control system and even keyboard shortcuts. You can also access it from any operating system, browser, or IDE, including extension for VS Code. Installing CodeReady Workspaces in your OpenShift cluster is as simple as looking up and installing its dedicated operator from the operator hub within your OpenShift console. So what is an operator then? You may ask. Updating and maintaining containerized applications should be an automated process. The same applies to your containerized development environment. Operators are small programs in your cluster that monitor your applications continuously and make sure they're running according to your instructions. When an operator detects a difference between the actual and the ideal states, it will act to correct it. If you recall from workshop 3, we discussed how Kubernetes master node continuously reconciles the expressed desired state and the current state of an object, and that is a controller in Kubernetes. Controller is a core concept in Kubernetes and is implemented as a software loop that runs continuously on the Kubernetes master node. An operator within OpenShift is essentially a custom controller. The operator is a piece of software running in a pod on the cluster, interacting with the Kubernetes API server. As for the operator hub, operators are offered as pre-packaged modules from the operator hub. OpenShift 4 introduced the operator hub, and that is a catalog of applications that can be installed by the administrator and added to individual projects by developers. As we mentioned, CodeReady Workspaces is offered as a dedicated operator from the OpenShift operator hub. Regardless of where you have your OpenShift cluster running, CodeReady Workspace runs as a pod inside your cluster. Therefore, workspaces are maintained and updated by an operator, and you can rest assured that your development environment is always available and running according to your requirement. Underneath each operator, each workspace basically is a stack, a container image that includes language runtime, compilers, tools, and utilities. Red Hat CodeReady Workspaces ships with stacks for many different languages. Stacks can go beyond just language support. A stack can contain multiple containers, allowing you to code in a replica of your application or your production environment. So let's get started and install CodeReady Workspaces on your OpenShift cluster. To install CodeReady Workspaces in our OpenShift cluster, the first step is to subscribe to the CodeReady Workspaces operator from the operator hub. But before that, we're going to create a project and install our operator in that project. So that makes it easier for us to look at the resources that have been built as a result of installing CodeReady Workspaces, and also the applications that we're going to get later. So we'll see them in the topology as we saw it earlier in the previous lab as part of the OpenShift console, web console, and how we could basically look at our applications from the topology view. Once we've subscribed to the operator, we are going to create a shake cluster, and then we are going to get a URL after the cluster is ready, and with that URL we can log into our space. And we need to also sign up for the spaces, for the workspaces as well, as you will see shortly. Once we've got our workspaces up and running, we can create a sample Java Spring Boot application. So you'll see what is that like to create different types of application. You've got Node.js, you've got Python, you've got different types of applications there anyway. And then once we've done that, we're going to run our COVID-19 application in our workspace. So let's go back to our OpenShift web console. So from here, I'm going to create a new project. I'm going to call it CodeReady project. Let's put it CodeReady Workspace project. Just makes it easier to find it later. CodeReady Workspace project. Let's create this. So our project is ready. Let's go into the operator. All these are happening within the administrator perspective, so remember that. If you go into the operator hub, make sure our current project is selected, so we are within the CodeReady Workspace project, but you're going to see it anyway before the CodeReady Workspace operator is also installed, so you can double check it later. So here's our CodeReady Workspace operator. So from here you can see how to install the defaults and the installation options and lots of other things that are quite useful for you to know. I'm going to just go ahead and install the subscription.
So again, you'll see it here that this is going to be a specific namespace on the cluster. So we are not going to put it in any other any other projects. You can go ahead and use default or any other workspace, any other projects, but for the reasons I mentioned earlier, we're going to use this project. And then the update channel latest, approval strategy automatic. That's it. Subscribe. So it takes a little bit of time for the operator to be ready. So as you can see, it's installing now. The deployment of the CodeReady operator, basically. You can also take a look at it if you want. We can basically go ahead and see what's actually happening from here. You can look at the events. So these are all the things that are happening at the moment. But again, I'm going to go back to the overview, the operators here. Okay, succeeded. So our CodeReady workspace is ready. It succeeded. And if we go into, as you can see here, the operator hub is where we look up the operators and install them. The install operators where all the operators that are installed within this project are coming up. So we've got this operator here. Now let's go ahead inside our operator. So the next step is going into the CodeReady Workspace cluster. So from this CodeReady Workspaces cluster tab, you need to create a tray cluster. So you'll see the YAML, so you can basically go ahead and make some changes if you want. I'm not going to make any changes. I'm just going to go ahead and create it. So this is going to take a little bit longer compared to the operator. So once this is ready, it's going to basically tell us that the workspace is ready, and we're going to get a URL within here that basically says the CodeReady Workspaces URL. So that basically shows us that the CodeReady Workspaces is actually ready. And in the Resources tab, as I said, we can basically take a look at what is actually happening. So as you can see, there are new resources being created. We have pods, we have replicas, we have services and deployments, and these are all kind of going ahead. So you need Postgres, you need lots of other resources basically being created. So my CodeReady Workspaces is now ready. As I can see, the URL is available now. When we go back to the resources section, we can see a fair number of resources had to be created for my CodeReady Workspaces, including 5 services, 6 replica sets, 5 pods, config maps, deployments. As you can see here, and we've got like Keycloak, which is for logging and authentication purposes. Lots of other resources basically. So that's the reason that it takes a little bit of time basically for your CodeReady Workspaces to become available. So now we can go ahead and use this URL. We need this one rather than the other one. So use the CodeReady Workspaces URL to log in. So as the first time user, I need to sign up basically. So I need to provide my username and password. So I can just go ahead and register. So I haven't actually got any account yet. So I'm going to basically just create a new account. I can just use this. Then I'm going to use a password of choice. So let's register. So that's my username, Haghighi. So here's my CodeReady Workspaces. So from here, I'm going to just select a sample app just to build a sample application for you to see. So I'm going to choose Java Spring Boot. Quarkus is also very interesting. You can go for Java Maven. You can even go for other types like PHP and Node.js. But I'm going to just go ahead with the Java Spring Boot since our application is a Java Spring Boot application. And then I'll basically talk about some of the options and tabs that you can see on the panel on the left hand side. So let's wait for our workspace. So here I am in my CodeReady Workspace. This is my IDE. This is Thea. So from here I can just go ahead and take a look at my Java Spring Boot application, the sample application we've just created. So if I go into the Project Explorer, I can just go ahead and take a look at it exactly like the way we do it in a normal IDE on our machines. So from here I can take a look at example application. That's our Java Spring Boot application. So it's between the source main Java, exactly the same way that we've got it with a normal Java application. And now from here I can just go ahead and run this application to see what it's like. But for you to know that, you can also take a look at your user runtime, the sort of commands you can have, like within Maven, obviously, because this is a Maven based. So we've got build, debug, run, test, and obviously this is going to be on an 8080 TCP. And also, if you want to look at the outline of this project, you've got main and you've got a JSON provider, so it is also available from there. But just to run this application, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to right click. I mean, there are multiple ways you can go from the tabs on the top, but I'm just going to go ahead and just run it. It takes a few seconds for the application to run. As you can see, I can see the Spring. So Splash is there, so the Spring Boot application is now running. So it is running and it's giving me the URL to take a look at my application. So let's open the URL. So here's my HTTP example. I can say hello and then invoke. So hello, hello. So it's just a simple one, user greeting service. So as you can see, we've just got our Spring Boot application up and running fairly quickly. So now let's close this one. Go back to stop this one. You can use Control-C to stop this application. Also, if you want to bring the terminal here, you can just go ahead from the terminal up there, open terminal, and you can open the terminal for a specific container, so you can basically interact with your application. So from this panel here on the left hand side, if I go ahead and if we want to search for something in your project, you can easily look for it. So if I say, for instance, like pick Snowdrop here, Snowdrop, basically goes ahead and finds it in your project exactly the way that you've got it with your normal IDE. If you've got a repository, it's basically working with the source control. If it's signed, if it's set up with the source control, then with that basically you can go ahead and use it with your GitHub or your Git repository. At the moment we haven't got that, so that's why there is no repository found here. The debugging is the next section. It's quite sophisticated if you want to debug line by line and take a look at your threads and other things. It actually works very well. I've tried it once with one of my applications and it worked very well. What I'm going to do now is to show you how you can actually take a look at your applications, your pods basically, from our topology that we talked about earlier. So this application that we've just got up and running, this is Spring Boot application. If I go ahead and go back to my OpenShift web console, so let's take a look at our web console. So from here, if I go into the developer perspective and then topology, not for all project, I'm going to use the CodeReady Workspace project, the one that we used earlier. So from here, you can take a look at the pods, all those resources that were created as part of this workspace's creation. So once that workspace get deployed, all these pods are going to basically become available, all these that you can see here. Some of them are like, for instance, the CodeReady. If I go in here and then click on the route, it basically takes me back to the workspace that we've created earlier. You can take a look at it here. As you can see, the dashboard is now loading, and it's the same workspace that we had earlier. So if I go ahead and click on this is my workspace. This is the Spring Boot application, and if I just go ahead and open it, I can just open the application from here. So that's one way of basically accessing your workspaces from all those pods within your topology. And if I want to take a look at my application, Usually the ones with workspaces, starting with workspaces, are the ones that are basically our applications within that workspace. So the Spring Boot application we have, as you can see here, is basically we've got that port 8080, and that's basically for our Spring Boot application, and it's a Maven, so that our Spring Boot application was also a Maven. So you can also see all the routes and also the services that are available on those ports. So that's just a quick example of what you basically get from your developer perspective. So we just looked at how we can create a workspace with a sample application, with a Java Spring Boot sample application. Now we want to go ahead and use our GitHub repositories for our COVID-19 application and basically create our workspace based on those GitHub repos. So let's go ahead and open our CodeReady Workspace. So the Spring Boot app is now running. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop this from here and then add a new workspace. So for this one, again, there are two options. One is the getting started one with the sample application, that was the Java Spring Boot or any other type that you want to create, or we can just define our custom workspace. For this one, I'm going to call it COVID app. And then here's the minimum definition of your dep file. I would highly suggest you go ahead and read this dep file documentation here. It's actually quite thorough and you get to know everything about the dep file. One thing that is quite interesting is if you want to define your minimal dep file. So in here it basically says that here's the minimal definition, and if you want to define your project for that, so here's an example of a minimal dep file with a single project, and here's with like more than one project. So I'm going to just go ahead and copy paste this part, and I'm not going to do the components because components are the plugins that we're going to enable manually. So let's go ahead and copy this, and I'm going to call these my parser app, and then it's basically, it changes this one in here. Let's keep it as COVID app actually. COVID app, I'm going to call this my parser app, and then the git is going to be my git repo here. Let's go back, and then here. So that's all. Let's go ahead and create it. So you see I've basically defined my project. The name for my project, the source is the type is of type git, and then here's the git address. Let's go ahead and create it. So whilst this is happening, let's take a look at our workspaces. So from here you can see our workspaces. So we've got one which is the Spring Boot application that we stopped, and the other one is also being created, which is our new application from our git repo. If I go into the dep file for that one, it is quite similar to what we've just created, but that one is from a zip file, and also here are the components that have been enabled for that one. Is a Java and also dependency analytics and also some ports, and it defines a number of other things including commands like for building. So here's the build command. The other one is debug, remote Java application. Another one is run, another one is debug. But here are a few things basically that you can define in your dep file, and we're going to get to that shortly. Another important point here is about the memory limit that you can define for your components. And for instance, here we've got the memory limit of 768 megabytes. So we're going to basically add this as well to some of our type of applications in our dep file. So let's go back into our workspaces. I'm going to add a few more parts into my dep file. Firstly, I'm going to enable a few plugins. As you saw, there were a few components that we didn't include, but here we can actually do it from here. So for the Share Machine Exec service, this is one of the requirements. You need to have this, and this is a plugin to provide creation terminal or task for Eclipse, which is quite important and useful. So definitely enable this one. And then the other one is because our application is based on Java 11, we want to enable Maven, Gradle, and Java 11 support. So now these two are enabled. So if I save it and then apply, it will basically restart my workspace for COVID app. It's going to take a bit of time, and then once we've got this up and running, I'm going to show you how we can actually add commands to that as well, those components that we saw earlier. It makes it quite useful because you can define what sort of commands are available, and you can even define the arguments that goes on the command line if there are extra arguments, and that basically helps you to define and specify all those arguments and those environmental parameters before you share that with your teams. And that's one of the important features of this CodeReady Workspaces. Basically, it leaves zero configuration to your team members, as you can, as an admin, you can basically define everything yourself. Or another basically advantage is that if you've got multiple teams working together, they can define their own environmental parameters and share that, and that makes it easier for the rest of the team to contribute and not spend so much time going through all those configurations. Still waiting for my COVID app to get enabled. So now my workspace is updated and running. So let's go ahead and open it. So a few steps are going to happen initially. So we'll open up the workspace, the IDE, and then it will go ahead and clone my GitHub repos, the one that I've basically just provided. So it's going to take a bit of time. As you know, my README file is actually quite large, and it's going to get the README file as well. There are configurations that you can define, so you wouldn't basically get everything. So here's the project is imported. Now I can go ahead and take a look at it. My Explorer, let's go to the source, main, and then Java, and here's my COVID-19 application. So if I want to run this, all I need to do is run. So any changes made in here will get reflected immediately in our production if this is already deployed on OpenShift. Now, as you can see, the Spring Boot application is going ahead. It seems to be doing fine. No errors. My JPA is being initialized. And here we go. Now the application is running. So it says a new process is listening on port 8082. As you know, our parser is listening on 8082. So it basically read the properties file and is asking me whether I want to expose that. And I said yes. And here's the link now. And it will basically open up the link. So it says the application is not available because obviously we are not going into the we're not calling the endpoints. So now I call the hello endpoint and I've got hello world, so it's working fine. If I maximize it, let's look at it here and test it out with some of our applications like get country data Germany. See if we get the data. Here's all the data for Germany. As you can see, on the 9th of August, we've got over 217,000 positive cases for COVID-19. So that was a very quick one, just to show you how we can get, how we can basically initialize our workspace with our Git repos. Now, what we are going to do is we are going to define build and run commands for this application. Even though the run command works fine, we can actually go ahead and define our own build command. So for this, if you remember from our dev file, so we could basically define some commands here. The way to do that, if you take a look at here in the dev file, you get enough information about it, how you can define your own commands. I've already got it written in here. So here's a build and a run command. Let me just add it here. So commands, first one is a build, and then the second one is run. And for build, it's just a simple one. I've got the project root, that's the root of your project, your workspace, and then the name of my application. So in this case, my parser app, not my code parser app. Let's change that. And then it basically says Maven clean install. You can basically find that. If you want to add more arguments to that, you can just do it after this, in case you have some arguments, like if you want to define the memory, the heap size, and all those things. And then for the run command, I'm basically just saying go into my targets folder, and again I need to change this because the name of that folder is going to be the same as the name of my project. And then go into the targets and then run java-jar, any file that's basically the extension is jar, which is in my target. And the component type is Maven. One thing that could happen is if I try to save this, it's probably going to tell me that the Maven is not is an unknown alias. So what you can do under here, you can say alias basically Maven. And that basically connects your Maven to your Java 11, and that resolves the problem. If I go ahead, now it's all saved. So let's apply it, and once we apply that, we get a build and run command. Let's apply it. So now my application is ready and running. Let's open our workspace. So as I said, the README file usually opens up here, the README file for the Git repo. But what we are interested in is you're going to take a look at our Java files. Let's go into source, Java, code-writing. So if I want to build the application, now I've got the new commands basically added here. So I've got build and run. So when you add more commands, it gets all added in here. As you saw initially for the sample application we created, we had a number of commands there. So this is something that is quite useful again when you want to share your project with others and want others to contribute. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to make some changes in my application and then build it and then run it again to see what's going to happen. So for that, if we go back to our COVID-19 repo from Johns Hopkins University, data, I'm basically going to switch from the number of positive cases into the number of deaths. And time series, as you know, we are using the global confirmed cases, and now I'm going to use the global death cases. So for this one, you need to get the raw CSV file. Let's copy the link, make sure the link is CSV. Yes, that's right. So I've got the raw version of the CSV file. Now going back into my data service, and from here I'm going to copy paste it. So that would be the new CSV path as I've defined it in my application. Then I'm going to comment this out. Okay. So I basically made a change in my file from confirmed global cases into the death global. And now I'm going to build, save it. You can basically save it from here exactly like an IDE. So I've saved it and I'm going to build it. And the build, as we had defined it earlier, is just a Maven theme install, exactly the same as what you do on your own machine with your own IDE. So here's my screen. JPA is initialized. Okay, the build is successful. I'm going to run it. We can just use the same one like before. We can use the run here. Let's use the run here. Because last time, if you remember, I basically just right click and choose run. But now it's going to go ahead and use the run command I had defined, which goes into my target. Because I use the Maven packaging, I wanted it to go exactly into the target directory, fetch my jar file, which is the only jar file here, and then it basically runs that with java-jar. My JPA is initialized. And it's again asking me, do you want it to be listening on 8082 and do you want to expose that port? I would say yes, and then you're going to open the link. So if I open it here properly for you, you're going to see that. First of all, let's check it out, make sure that it is working. Hello world, so it's fine. And I'm going to basically query the same data that we did earlier. Get country data and then Germany. So it should be the number of death cases as we had just changed it. So from that 200,000, before I go ahead and take a look at it, must be now the number of deaths. So on the 9th of August, we've got 9,202. That's the number of deaths in Germany on the 9th of August for COVID-19. So I just made a quick change in my application and you saw that it's got immediately reflected in my code right here. And if I had it like as a project with multiple people contributing, the same thing would have happened across the team. And when you've got the application deployed on OpenShift or Kubernetes, the same thing would happen basically in production. And your team can easily log in and code from anywhere in production. So that was just a quick demo of what we can do basically with CodeReady Workspaces and how we can actually define those commands. We can do the same thing with our UI app, and I'm basically for the UI app I've got some extra arguments for my command line. So instead of just saying java-jar and then look for that, I need to have this Vaadin production, Vaadin production, so I need to have this flag as well. Just as an example, because this is a very important, my UI is based on Vaadin and it is important to be included there. If I don't include that, my application wouldn't even run. So that basically shows how important it is. For the sake of time, I'm not going to show you how you can do the UI, but if you want to run the UI within the workspaces, all you need to do is using this command basically, and it's exactly the same as what we had in our Docker file back in part 2. One more thing that I'm going to show you here is if we go back to our project, to our workspaces, in here you can add more project to your workspace, and this is really good for microservices applications when you have multiple projects. So this is actually quite important and useful. So I can add more projects. So for instance, I can just go ahead and add my UI from here. I can just copy paste the UI code, the UI repo address. And once I do that, it basically gets added into my dev file as a new option, as you saw earlier when I showed you for the number for 2 projects. When you have 2 projects, it gets a new project will be added right down your first one. Again, very useful feature of CodeReady Workspaces and how you can have multiple projects in place. Definitely spend some time to take a look at the dev file definition and how you can define your dev file and what are the properties and all those things. the guide here basically starts from a quick update and information on CodeReady Workspaces, what you need to do about the IDE. Everything is already included, and it goes into details of even how to have your Maven project, artifact, and everything else. Very, very useful. Definitely spend some time to get familiar with that. Another thing that we're going to do here, I'm going to show you how to add more, how to change some of the configurations for your workspaces. So for instance here, if I want to run my second workspace, on the admin side I haven't actually included that. That's configuration to allow more than one workspace to run at the same time. So if I press on this, it basically says you're not allowed to start more workspaces. To change that, you need to look into your custom resource definition within the administrator tab in your OpenShift console. So let's take a look at it together. So if I go back to the administrator, before I go through that one, you need to know the reason behind that. And the reason behind that is, if you go into the workload config map, you are within that project for CodeReady Workspaces project. Tray comes with a number of configurations here. I think the configurations will be easier to follow here. So you can see the host, you can see the some Kubernetes properties, you can see the the workspaces names and how those names are basically gets generated as you add more workspaces. Some of the port numbers and how there's they get basically attached to your workspace. Lots of information. To change that, you basically get multiple config maps, and those config maps defines the configuration for your CodeReady Workspaces. There's a configuration. There's a config map called CodeReady, and another one is Workspace. So when you create your application, those config maps get generated automatically. And to change those the configurations within those config maps, you need to go into the administrator, and then within the custom resource definition, let's look for Shade cluster. So here's the custom resource definition, and in here I can basically change some properties, and it gets reflected into my CodeReady Workspaces. One of the things that we can change here, I'm going to show you. Close this. So this is the custom resource definition. So if you want to have more than change the limit from running one workspace at a time, you can change that, for instance, to 4 by adding it under server and custom shape properties. So the important part is you can't just put it on its own. You have to add it under custom shape properties and server. Other properties you can change, other configurations, for instance, you can limit the number of workspaces. This is different from the number of running workspaces. The number of workspaces, as you saw, it was like I created 2 workspaces, but when I wanted to run more than one, it basically told me that it is not possible. The other one is you can define the allocated RAM for the user, and this is here that share limits user workspaces RAM. Can define that, and that needs to go under custom shape properties again. So you need to, for instance, add this in here. Let's go for the server. If there is a server, there isn't a server as far as I can see. So what you can do, you can define that with the specs. Say server. Oh, I had already said as well. And then custom properties, and then chain limits user workspace run counts is going to be 4. And then once you save it, it gets reflected in your CodeReady Workspaces. Again, quite simple. You can make all those changes from your custom resource definition as an admin, and you can even define it for users. You can define how the workspaces are going to get created. Is it going to be per namespace per project, or is it going to be one workspace per project? All the information about that one is also available from Red Hat user guidelines from here, so you can read about it here, or just search for limiting the number of users per workspace or the number of running workspaces. So the administration tab is going to be your friend. The custom resource definition is going to be your friend if you need to make some changes to your workspaces. So that was CodeReady Workspaces. We've created a sample application. We've also used our GitHub repositories to create applications and deploy. We created commands, and we saw how it is to actually have a URL for your workspace and make all the changes from there. And by making that change, you can see the result in production. And that URL can be shared with your team and the rest of your team to contribute to a project or a workspace. So let's go back to our summary. That was the summary of what we've done here in this lab, and then in the next one we are going to look at CodeReady containers, and that's a local version of OpenShift on your machine. That would be a fairly short workshop to show you how you can install CodeReady containers on your machine and also deploy and test your applications there. I hope you've enjoyed this lab, and I'll be looking forward to seeing you in our next workshop. Stay tuned. See you soon.